everybody, and it's nice to have everybody here. Today you're getting ready for your midterms. I'm sure that's going to be very exciting. Yes, somebody's got the book. That's terrific. We were talking last time, and we sort of left off last time, about the Chinese diaspora and Greater China. And we'd gone through the material on sort of the Chinese diaspora and the overseas Chinese and the incredible network that exists. One of the things that's important about that chart, which we had up, if we can get back to it just a little bit. Let's make sure we know where we're going, was that not only do you have this incredible network of business relations, but that everybody, you also have a lot of familial relations here, that people marry across through these lines and across these lines. So it's not only business, it's not only the clan, it's not only the place where people came from, which incidentally is largely Fujian or northern Guangdong province, but also through marriage and through that kind of relationship. So this kind of thing exists throughout Southeast Asia, and it equally applies to the Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore cases, though somewhat less in Singapore's case than not. And we were talking about the different kinds of hubs that exist, at Taiwan sitting really across from the Yangtze River outlet near Shanghai, this very close connection that people have. And of course, Hong Kong, the Pearl River Delta, and finally Singapore sitting there at the end of the Kra Peninsula, at the end of Malaysia, sort of coordinating the economic activities of the ASEAN states. There are three different miracles, but three different systems too. And I think as we were talking last time about Taiwan, a problem left over from history. These are some of the data that we can get, not that important for us today. We see where it stands in terms of the ease of doing business among its thing. It's right down here, number 16, ahead of Japan, but not, Korea, Hong Kong, and Singapore somewhat easier, and we put that in quotes, Singapore being the easiest. The opportunities, as I said earlier, for U.S. businesses in this region, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and electronics, which is not surprising. If you did the readings, the thing about duck's eggs, that nice chapter in the Schumann book, you'll see that really the ability of the Taiwanese businesses to leverage their connections with the United States and with technology has been very important. We will look later at Unipresident, a food company that has ambitions to be the largest food company in the world, and look at how this family-run business expanded across Asia and has become very successful. Taiwan, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, still struggles with the issue of creating brands. You've undoubtedly heard of HTC, the cell phone company that in 2011 was the largest cell phone manufacturer in the world. Not anymore. They fell behind. These are the areas that the Commerce Department, U.S. Commerce Department, the commercial service officers in our so-called embassy, we don't have an embassy in Taiwan, we have a liaison office, what's the difference, have identified as being the having the greatest potential for American businesses. Okay, and as you can see, electronics and computer services are right up there at the very top. Industrial chemicals, medical devices, electric power, etc.
The medical, if you can go back a slide, the medical equipment and stuff, that's highly regulated in the U.S.
Yeah.
How is that regulated in Taiwan?
That's a very good question, and it's a question that I would have to research in order to answer. But I think what we can see is that there's highly developed medical people, many of them graduates of American medical schools. They have good medical facilities in Taiwan. And what we're talking about here is selling into hospitals. Things like MRI machines, CT machines, diagnostic equipment, perhaps even hospital beds, which are nowadays, if anybody's been in a hospital lately, I hope not too many people, find that there are very sophisticated. Yeah, Joy.
Taiwan has like a universal type of like insurance for like their citizens,
Mm-hmm.
so it's very, very cheap to like go see a doctor or like have surgery or anything because it's mostly like covered.
Mm-hmm.
So it's for insurance wise, it's like better than
It's
the
better.
United States.
Oh, well, it's not difficult to get much better than the United States, and I'm glad you raised that issue because with universal health care that you do get in Taiwan, you get pretty high quality. But I think the thing that we have to pay attention to again is that Taiwan is a study in strategic ambiguity. What is Taiwan? Is it a country or is it a region, you know? Because nobody acknowledges it as a country anymore because of various reasons. And we mentioned last time the linguistic problem of whether or not the United States accepts, acknowledges, or recognizes Taiwan as part of the one China formulation. This is an extremely hot issue and one that we have to pay attention to. But we talked about the rest of the slide. Let's talk about, we know about the economic miracle that has occurred. We have a fully fledged market economy, middle class economy, parliamentary democracy, there with the question of identity being a big one, the whole question of U.S. relations, because after all, Taiwan was a client state of the United States, and the question that many people have raised of whether Taiwan is 21st century's Czechoslovakia or perhaps Ukraine. It's hard to tell. But there's a dilemma that we see here. Dilemmas are problems that have no really good answer. And this saying at the top that anything long divided will surely unite, and that anything long united will surely divide, which some of us may recognize as the opening sentence of The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the famous novel, a classic Chinese novel. We have to keep in mind what the issues are. There's a deadly embrace between the U.S., Taiwan, and the United States. Nobody wants to break it. And so if we let go, then we have a problem. There are problems of definition. We talk about maintaining the status quo in Taiwan, but what is the status quo? Because everybody has a different definition of it. There are problems of nationalism, which is very intense in the Chinese PRC case, very intense on the Taiwan side, and the two sides are quite distinct. What is Chinese? Very good question. A very good question. Refer you back to that Economist article that I mentioned earlier about Beijing's view of what is Chinese is very different from, say, Taiwan's view of what is Chinese, and certainly very different from the Hong Kong view of what is Chinese. There's a question of unification, of ideology. What do we mean by unifying, becoming part of one China? The problems of strategic ambiguity and problems of the economy, because it is a trading economy, it is an investment technology economy with a lot of their industry hollowing out and moving to the mainland in ways that perhaps were not anticipated. One way perhaps to deal with this is to try to take Beijing's perspective, which is not a bad perspective to take, and sort of put it in terms of our famous four basic questions. The question of rule. Remember that one of the questions was how do we rule a large country with a large population from a single place? And if we take that as one of the rubrics to look at, what we're dealing with really here is the question of territorial integrity. What is China? Where do China's borders end? There's a question here, because if the Beijing people accept the idea that Taiwan has the right to self-determination, which is a United Nations principle, Then what does Taiwan do? What does Beijing do about Tibet and Xinjiang, where we know there are fractions there that would like to break out and declare a certain degree of more independence than they have. This, of course, would destroy or certainly compromise the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party, which claims to rule all of China since time immemorial, quote unquote, without conveniently overlooking the fact that China, as its greatest extent, was actually under the Yuan dynasty and the Qing dynasty, neither of which were Chinese dynasties. But we don't want to talk about that. That gets people upset. What about greatness? China wants to become great again. China has the China dream. This is a question of legitimacy for the regime. And it's a very interesting question that people in China itself are beginning to question. What about transformation? How do we change China? Well, we have the Xi Jinping dream model of China being great, but could Taiwan be a model of slow evolution from authoritarianism to democracy? Could Hong Kong be a model, whereas slow, which of course it's not today, but is Taiwan a model for China? And finally, the question of dealing with the outside world. Is Taiwan an international or a domestic issue for Beijing? The world looks at it as an international issue. Beijing, of course, regards it as a domestic issue. And we, the United States, is seen largely as perpetuating Taiwan's separatism and so forth. Some of you may have seen the article, I think it was in today's or yesterday's New York Times, about the view of many people in China of the United States, which is a very complicated and very interesting question, because China sees the United States, officially at least in terms of the propaganda, as a country that does not have China's best interests at heart. At the same time, their elites are moving to the United States. They send their children to US universities. Xi Jinping's daughter went to Harvard. I mean, okay, this is where people park their money and buy their estates. Jack Ma of Alibaba, very successful, terrifically successful Chinese businessman, the guy who's running this huge online thing, has a mansion in the Poconos. Okay, so, yeah.
Most of the children of those Chinese Communist Party leaders are in U.S.
Yeah, that's right. Most of them are here.
Prestigious college.
Yeah, right. Harvard, maybe even Brooklyn College, but we don't know because when they show up, they are all under assumed names. Nobody knows, or at least if I knew, I've forgotten what Xi Jinping's Harvard name was, but it certainly wasn't Xi. Okay, so
His daughter's identity is still not identified yet.
still not identified. I think people have photographs. But anyway, and I'm sure that the appropriate authorities know. But here we have this statement from Jiang Zemin, which I think sort of explains a lot of what China's real position is, that we want peaceful reunification since Chinese should not fight Chinese. This is an old line. Of course, we know from Chinese history that one of the greatest, that China's fight Chinese all the time. We do not promise not to use force. If used, force will not be directed against our compatriots, but against the foreign forces that intervene in China's reunification. I think you get the general idea of what he's talking about here. And it's a very complicated situation. It's a very complicated situation. Why do we, as international business people, have to pay attention to this? Okay. Because Taiwan is an important player in the Asia-Pacific region. Okay, it's only 24 million people, but it has a lot of technology. It has it's a good market. They provide. They have big investments all around the world, and we have to pay attention to that, to this question. And of course, for an academic, this is a fascinating subject, and one that we could spend a lot more time on. And we can see that some of their businesses have been very successful. Stan Scheer with the Acer computer operation and IC manufacturing and stuff. HTC was a brand, as we mentioned earlier. It was very successful a couple of years ago, but it fell behind. We will look at this company later in the term, Uni-President, a fascinating, a really interesting case study of how a flour mill, people starting in it from a flour mill, became an Asian food giant, and how particularly important how the leaders of Uni-President were able to leverage change in the past, in the political, economic, social, and technological arena, and also very importantly, sort of how they had to change their management. Remember that in the video that we saw several weeks ago, that they have the leader of VTech saying, Chinese company, Chinese family firm works really well up to a certain size, and then it has to change. Well, we'll see how this affected Uni-President as an example. I'm going to skip over Taiwan for a bit and move on to Hong Kong. Down the coast, so to speak. Hong Kong is, some people would like to say, the capital of the overseas Chinese. This may be changing. Certainly people in Singapore would not think that. Certainly people in Los Angeles might not think that. But it is a fascinating place to be. I've spent a lot of time there as a former Foreign Service officer and as a university professor. My wife's from there, and I have a great deal of affection for the place. Besides, it's got great food, and that's really the important thing, isn't it? Number of years ago, Dick Hughes, a former old English, now he's dead actually, the late English journalist, wrote a book called Hong Kong, Borrowed Place, Borrowed Time. With the realization that obviously it was a borrowed place, Hong Kong. Where does Hong Kong come from? Opium War. This was one of the prizes that England got as a result of the Opium War. So it's a borrowed place and a borrowed time, because Hughes, even back writing in the 70s and 80s, realized, as everybody else did, is that Hong Kong can exist only for a certain length of time, after which it will be sort of absorbed or have to deal with, at least, its neighbor to the north. I think you know who I'm talking about. As a place to do business, it's terrific. It's the number 2 on the ease of doing business. There's almost no problems with it. And why not? Why not? It's a former British colony. It has very strong institutions. It has rule of law. It has extensive commercial services. It's the place, I used to say, where the fast buck reaches terminal velocity. I no longer think that's true. Rather, that has become Shenzhen, which is just across the border. But as far as business people are concerned, that is to say, people like us, what are we really concerned with? Hong Kong is the sort of the jewel, shall we say, of the Pearl River hub. This is the manufacturing, or at least one of the big manufacturing areas of China. This is where so much of the stuff that you see in Walmart and Target and Macy's and everywhere else comes from.
These were the first one who opened by the Chinese reformer.
That's right. That's right. As we have read in our material, this is where Deng Xiaoping came to. This is where the first, here at Shenzhen, the first special economic zone started. When I first went to Shenzhen, it was a wide spot on the railroad tracks on the way to Guangzhou. In fact, this is where you got off the train at the border between Hong Kong and China. You walked across a bridge. At the end of the bridge was a young, this was during the Cultural Revolution, there was a Red Guard with a submachine gun.
It's called
Lo Wu, yeah, Lo Wu. And there was you got on you had lunch because the time zone changed, because you were on Chinese time, not on Hong Kong time, British time, and then you got on a train to Guangzhou. Well, now, of course, it's high-speed train all the way to Guangzhou. It's completely changed. And Shenzhen, far from being a wide spot in this tracks, actually has a larger population today than Hong Kong, about 8 million people, about as big as New York City. But really, it is where you can see down here a glitzy place. I don't know how well that shows up on the video, but it's, and you see you've got Zhuhai, Macau, and Zhongshan, which is where Sun Yat-sen came from, Shenzhen, up here, Dongguan, and Guangzhou all the way. This is the hub, very important hub, but it's all mediated through Hong Kong in terms of finance, design. Remember, we saw the Hong Kong company that has its design in Hong Kong, its factory in China. Its factory is just up the river. And if we take a look, according to my former colleague Michael Henright from a couple of years ago in an essay he wrote, this area has about 3–4% of China's population and produces 10% of Chinese GDP and about a quarter of China's trade. So you can see what a powerhouse this very small region is, and it's gotten about 20% of China's FDI. And where is that FDI coming from? It's not coming from foreigners, it's coming from Hong Kong people, coming from the overseas Chinese. So here is some of the basic statistics, and this little map shows you exactly how important it is. Well, what is it? What is Hong Kong? And this is former British colony, ruled by the Brits pretty well, I think. It was, when I was there, it was sort of colonialism with a human face, as you could say. But local people didn't have much say into what happened. The government consulted, but made its own decisions. Of course, most of the people in the government were Hong Kong people. Today, of course, it is a special administrative region, which is to say it's part of China, but it is one country. It's the second of systems of the one country, two systems model. But there are a lot of tensions between Hong Kong and the mainland. We've seen last year the yellow umbrella revolution, where people were saying, look, we have one country, two systems. This was supposed to guarantee the continuation of Hong Kong's way of life with minimal interference from the mainland. And in fact, there's massive interference from the mainland in what's happening in China. And there is a number of problems in Hong Kong that have become exacerbated since 1997, when it reverted back to Chinese law. One of them is this issue of income distribution. There's always been big gaps between the rich and poor in Hong Kong. There's absolutely no question about that, but it's gotten worse. And one of the big problems that people have is that if you want to go live in Hong Kong, finding a place to live is really expensive. If you think New York is expensive, try Hong Kong. Of course, you can get a luxury flat of 300 square feet. Think about that.
So if the lifestyles are pretty similar, it's like the lifestyle in New York City, I guess.
Say again?
I'm trying to say the life in Hong Kong, the lifestyle in Hong Kong is pretty similar like the lifestyle in New York City.
For some region, for some parts of New York City, yeah.
Pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. It's pretty high. It's very high speed.
It's capitalization system.
Yeah, it's very high speed. It's very, very pleasant to be there. In some respects, the weather's lousy, but that's another thing. It's nice if you like hot and humid. But the real problem that exists is the relationship with the mainland. It used to be, when I first started teaching at the University of Hong Kong, none of my, which is an English language institution, by the way, when I first started teaching at the University of Hong Kong, none of my students spoke Mandarin. None. Zero. Or very few. When I left 7 years later, they all spoke Mandarin. Okay? So we have an idea of that. You find lots and lots of people from the mainland now there. When my wife goes there, she says, "Oh, it's full of mainlanders." And of course, there's a problem here because Hong Kong people see themselves as really part of a very sophisticated, basically Western style, Western perspective on life, and they have tended to look at, in this sense of hierarchy that we've talked about before. You've got Hong Kong up here, and then you've got the mainland, and you've got Taiwan, and these are sort of the xiangxia, the peasants that we have.
Assimilate with the mainland Chinese.
In part because the mainland Chinese don't want to assimilate with Hong Kong people.
That's the tension.
It's a huge tension there. Part of it is language. Hong Kong is a Cantonese speaking place, and for those of us who speak Cantonese, you know that Cantonese is the real Chinese because Mandarin is sort of infected by.
We don't even hire anybody who don't speak Cantonese.
Oh, well, of course. If you work in Hong Kong, you have to speak Cantonese. There's no way around it. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom told me this because like she went to Hong Kong when it was like part of like the British.
When it was a British colony.
Yeah, and then and I was like, oh, like she like whatever. I was like, oh, when I go, I'll be able to like speak Mandarin. Like, oh, it's fine. She's like, no. Speak English.
You
She's
speak
like,
English.
She's like, speak English. I'll like treat you better. And
Yeah,
it's like,
that's right.
yeah.
And in part, it's part of being Cantonese. It's part of the Hong Kong mentality, which is very important. But also because of a great resentment, and mind you, do we have these problems in the United States about immigrants, about anchor babies? Have you heard that phrase before? People from Hong Kong, young ladies from the mainland who are about to give birth have come into Hong Kong, have a Hong Kong baby. Okay, if you have a Hong Kong baby, that means the Hong Kong baby gets 3 stars on their Hong Kong ID card, which means that they can access all of the schooling and universities and so forth that exist in Hong Kong that are difficult to deal with if you don't have 3 stars. My son has 3 stars, I have 2, and there's a big difference in how we're treated by the government. He can go to Hong Kong and work, I can't. Okay?
Wait, who's born there?
Huh?
Who's born there?
I have a child who's born there, yeah.
It seems provided you have to live in Hong Kong for a while, right?
I have to live there, I think, 7 or 8 years before you get that.
Understand their language?
My Cantonese is strictly good for restaurants. That's the most important thing in life, isn't it?
It's very different, like Mandarin.
Oh, completely different.
So different.
It's a different language. It's a different language. But anyway, there's a great resentment to this because, as you can see from this, what it has done is filled up all the hospitals. So Hong Kong people can't get into hospitals, or couldn't until fairly recently, because all the beds were taken by ladies from the mainland who were increasing the population of the People's Republic. But they also end up with Hong Kong ID cards, which means that as they get older, they can come back to Hong Kong, go to Hong Kong government schools, and go to Hong Kong government universities. Pretty cool idea, yeah.
So, like, if I was to go there, like, could I get an ID?
Oh, you would get an ID. You'd be required to get an ID. But you'd only have 1 star.
But do I have to live there for a certain period?
You have to live there for a certain period of time. There are some other requirements that you have. You gotta learn the language. It's like here.
You become a citizen to if you can have a,
But that's how, you don't have to become a citizen.
No, you're not a citizen. You're a resident, and there's a difference.
Right.
Yeah. And what we're talking about here is that we have these Hong Kong babies, these mainland babies but the real reason isn't so much is that they see as, hey, in our own society, do we have politicians who are leveraging this kind of concern?
Yeah.
Yeah, Donald Trump.
He's so annoying. Like,
Yeah, he is very annoying.
I think he's slow.
I agree, but we're not supposed to
there's
talk.
so much progress.
I'm not supposed to speak politics here. One last question for you.
One last question is, what does the rank stand? What's the 1 star stands for? Like they have a certain rank?
One star means nothing. It means you don't get anything. 3 stars means you're a resident. And what it means is that when you go into Hong Kong, it's a very electronically sophisticated city. When you go into Hong Kong, you just get out your ID card, swipe it through the thing, and you go right through. If you're a foreigner like me, without only 2 stars on their card, I have to go through passport. Yeah.
So the maximum score is 3?
Max is 3. It's just 3 stars simply means it indicates on your ID card that you're a resident.
That's it?
Yeah, that's all it means. It means nothing else. But being a resident in Hong Kong means that you get a lot of perks that you don't get otherwise.
Might be crazy, but if you get stopped by a cop, right, and you have 3 stars, are they more lenient for you? Like, are they?
You get stopped by a car, but it doesn't matter whether you got 3 stars, 5 stars, or 0 stars. The cops will nail you. Yeah. Okay. But so we have this anchor baby problem, largely because it came to fill up the hospitals, and because of the encroachment on use of Hong Kong facilities by local people. There are some people who have called the mainlanders locusts, and if you pay attention to this picture, you will recognize exactly what that picture is a parody of Tank Man. From the Tiananmen days. So this is a serious problem for Hong Kong, and one that continues to be an issue. And as, of course, Hong Kong becomes more and more part of the mainland, perhaps some of Hong Kong's freedoms and the rule of law and things like that will erode, and that's what people in Hong Kong are really afraid of. Yeah, Joy.
It's like help their economy kind of. They just like build more hospitals.
Well, yeah, but there's a problem in Hong Kong. Where are you going to build them? There's not much room in Hong Kong. It's a very small place. It's extremely crowded. Some of the highest density population in the world, and which is one reason why it's so exciting. On the other hand, why it's not so exciting. And but it's a very interesting place, and everybody should go there, at least for the food. And also for doing business, because it's a great place to do business. The thing about Hong Kong, though, that we as Americans have to pay attention to, is that Hong Kong is very fast. Hong Kong operates at light speed. We do not. I have Hong Kong friends who say, I don't like to do business in America. I says, why is that? It says, you people are too slow. You want something, it gets done right away, or at least it used to. And it's an interesting society. As a multicultural, those of us from New York would feel right at home in it because it is a multicultural, multi-ethnic population. And as long as you speak Cantonese, you're fine.
Not even. Like I went there and maybe like a year ago too. And and like I didn't have any problems.
No.
I just speak a word of Chinese or anything.
Yeah, no.
But also I had a tour guide, so that's probably why.
What I'm talking about knowing Cantonese is if you're going to be there for a while.
Right. But like they make you feel very welcome.
Oh yeah,
They
well,
make you feel famous, I guess.
it's some of the best hotels in the world. The hospitality industry, they realize that tourism is a huge,
You just see my photo album, like it's like
yeah.
it's like famous. Like, it's
Yeah.
just,
But remember we talked earlier about the culture shock curve? You know, you go to Hong Kong and it's exciting and it's Chinese and it's colorful. It's one of the most colorful cities in the world, particularly at night with the lights and all of this sort of stuff. And oh, you go there and it's so exciting, it's so great. And after about 4 or 5 months there, when you realize you're not really able to talk to the people and where things are a little bit different, besides the fact that they're driving on the wrong side of the road, and so you got to be careful about crossing the street, then you begin to realize that, whoa, you know, maybe things are difficult. And as I said earlier when we were talking on this subject, I had a friend whose wife got to the point where she refused to leave her apartment because she couldn't cope with the crowds. She couldn't cope with the language. She couldn't cope also with the fact that Cantonese people, this is a stereotype of course, tend to be very abrupt and very aggressive. And if you can't communicate, then, I might, yeah,
But
see.
their rhymes out there, it's just like, I hate to say it, but it's many blessings.
Well, you get used to it. You get used to it.
Europeans are pretty bad too. They
But
live
no,
on
not
the
as bad
over-
as.
Yeah,
Like, it's bad.
yeah. So anyway, that's Hong Kong, but it's a great place to go. Yeah.
They are very rude too.
Oh, they're rude, particularly if you don't speak Cantonese.
It's really rude to you.
Yeah.
They don't want even talk with you if you don't.
That's right.
If you don't understand what they say.
唔識聽，冇嘢啊，係人啊，唔係人啊，
It's not right.
你食啊？唔講廣東話係唔係人啊？你唔知啊？The only reason why I got accepted by
What's the
my.
translation of that?
It's like you don't.
You want to translate that for us? Huh?
Are you a person?
Are you a person if you don't speak Cantonese?
Are you?
I guess I am. I speak Cantonese. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a real issue. It's a real issue. It's really interesting, and I would refer you to this. Let's see how we're doing on the time. To some of these videos about Hong Kong, the Hong Kong protests, the Hong Kong working lives. I think one of the things you got to realize about Hong Kong is that the workday is forever. You start early in the morning and you go late at night, and it's 5.5 days a week. So people work on Saturdays. And it's very intense because you've got to perform. You've got to perform. Yeah, Joy.
For stress levels, what would you think is worse, like Hong Kong or Tokyo?
Different types of stress. Different types of stress. I would think that as foreigners, let's do it this way. As foreigners in Japan, my experience was we're exempted for a lot of stuff because we are just different.
I've been to Tokyo and you'll see people passed out on it's so intense.
Oh, it's-
how much, stress they
If
have.
you're Japanese, it's extremely intense. It's very intense.
What do you mean? Pass out on the street?
They are so tired where it's they will rather sleep on the street so they can get to work quicker the next morning than go home sometimes.
Well, that's in part because home might be a 2-hour train ride.
Yeah, if they live outside of Tokyo, their train ride is already very long, and they usually have to stand. So since it's so crowded, they rather just sleep on the street because it'll save them time.
Well, I can't say that I've seen that, but I would say that it's a different type of intensity. Yeah, it's very intense. It's very intense in Hong Kong too. On the other hand, in Hong Kong, as foreigners, we can play a lot nicer than we can in there. It's more open in that respect. Okay, but anyway, if you're really interested in what it's like to work in Hong Kong, I refer you to that YouTube up there at top. And if you're interested in the Hong Kong protests, which happened last year, these are two very, very good reports that you might have a chance to look at. I like Hong Kong a lot. I find it a fascinating place, and a place that we have to look at. Okay. Our next stop in this survey or grand tour of the overseas Chinese, we've talked about Taiwan, we've talked about Hong Kong, we're going to talk about another completely different place. And I think this is important for us to realize that while we're talking about the overseas Chinese, we're also about to talk about 3 different environments. Singapore, again, an island state. The Schumann material on Lee Kuan Yew is very good. If you really want to understand that place, you really have to work there. And you can see it's there. It's sort of like Hong Kong. It's got a big neighbor, Malaysia. Like Hong Kong, it's kind of a small population. And like Hong Kong, it's got a very high GDP per capita. Our little bug there excludes that, $60,000 a year. It's higher than the United States. So what do we have to know about Singapore? It is the #1 ease of doing business place on that database. It is #2 in the Global Competitiveness Report. Okay. It's a fabulous place to do business, comma, as long as you obey the rules. And that's the key, obeying the rules and understanding the nature of the regime. Founded by Lee Kuan Yew, one of the great leaders of Asia, but a person with this, very specific views about hierarchy, about obedience, about creating an ideal society, which is what he is really concerned about. He was a very activist state with very rich sovereign wealth funds, enormous emphasis on merit and performance. He realized early on, as the Schumann material points out, its survival depended on foreign direct investment. He welcomed it. Come on in. But also a society that values, he pushes what are called the Asian values. That's why we talk about Confucian democracy. And very importantly, over time, it is really the regional hub for ASEAN. This is, if Hong Kong is the regional hub for South China, if Taiwan has a good relationship with the Yangtze River Valley, this is really the case for the ASEAN states, for the 10 states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And we really have to pay attention to Hong Kong, because working and doing business there is very different from doing business in Hong Kong and doing business in Taiwan. It's certainly very different from doing business in the mainland. One of the big differences is the fact that the state is not only an activist state in terms of regulating the society and regulating the economy, but it's very active internationally through sovereign wealth funds. The Government Investment Corporation of Singapore has huge investments around the world, including New York, and you can see they're in London, Paris, Munich, Sydney, Tokyo, Shanghai, all over Korea, and needless to say, in the United States. A friend of my son's used to work for them, and he was working very, very hard. How did it start? The first thing we have to realize is that Singapore, former British colony, used to be part of the Malaysian Federation, so to speak, and it was kicked out of Malaysia because Lee Kuan Yew and Rahman, the leader of Malaysia, had very different views about what Singapore's role should be. Rahman was very concerned that this was a Chinese state and that would take over basically the Malaysian Federation, and Lee Kuan Yew wanted to go off to maintain his own tight little island, and they just split. Yeah.
So by reading the textbook in between about Singapore and Malaysia, they used to be one country.
They used to be one country.
After the royals in 1969.
Yeah.
The clash between Chinese, the overseas Chinese, and the local Malaysian people over some issues.
Yeah, many issues.
Which caused the big casualty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Later on, the Singapore decided to quit.
Right. In fact, when I first went to Singapore, I'll tell you, in 1964, I just finished 3 years as a year as a naval officer in Vietnam. I was told I couldn't go to Singapore because it was too dangerous. And I said, wait a minute. I've just spent 13 months worrying about the Viet Cong, and now you're going to send me down to, you say it's too difficult to go to Singapore? I'm sorry, I'm going to go. So I went, but they were having severe race riots. And the issue of of community, as they call it, is one of the big underlying issues in Singapore.
When they become mad, they can be very mean to you.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, they're Fukinese, you see, that's why.
Very mean.
Yeah. But it started out, as you know from reading the material, it was a great shock to Lee Kuan Yew to leave Malaysia because he had fought for independence from UK, or at least agitated for independence from UK. But it started out as a very poor place. In '64, Singapore was a very poor place, like everywhere else in Asia. Okay. And Lee Kuan Yew realized that he had to create a new type of society. He had to attract foreign investment to build his economy. And he had to emphasize merit and performance. And if there's a society that is intensely meritocratic and very Confucian in that sense of stressing education, stressing hard work, stressing being correct, quote unquote, that is Singapore. It went into being capital intensive with oil refineries and with electronics, very big in electronics. And lastly, is now a sort of knowledge-intensive economy in services, software, things like that. It's a beautiful city. They've done some extremely intelligent things there, but it's also a very, very different kind of environment than what you might think it is. Singapore has been ruled by the People's Action Party since the beginning. Recently, elections, the control, the dominance of the PAP is eroding, but basically everybody likes it. Or at least they see it as providing continuity and stability against a background of looking at Indonesia with the convulsions that have happened there, the difficulties in Malaysia, of course the Vietnam War and things like that. As you can see, the philosophy is, so to speak, to maximize cooperation and minimize contention, which is to say everybody is very calm and everybody agrees because that's the Singapore way. And again, Confucian democracy is what it's all about. The core values, and taken from the Hasegawa material, stresses community. It's very Confucian, in this sense, very high tech, high context, okay. You do consensus, a lot of racial and religious tolerance. You find great variety of people there, but basically Chinese. The family, honest government, they pay their government employees, a lot of them, pay them high salaries. There's very little corruption in Singapore. In fact, if you try the corruption bit, you get thrown into jail, or maybe get some lashes because they still use that approach to civic discipline.
What I know is the basic needs of the civil workers of the Singapore is already provided by its government.
Yeah.
So it's not necessary for them to make extra money.
That's right, yeah. I mean, you get housing, you get all of that. Since family is very important, the Singapore government does some interesting things. It's a small population, it's an aging population, so they want more babies. So they have the Singapore government equivalent of Tinder. Not quite. But they encourage college-educated women. They have mixers for college, but you got to be college-educated, you see, to participate. So college-educated people, boys and college-educated, they want smart people, and preferably Chinese, but we don't want to say that.
It's really diverse in Singapore.
Yeah.
They have a little India, and they have
Oh, they have very diverse, but basically they want to have smart babies. And so they want to get smart women and smart men together to have smart babies. There's no guarantee that that's the result, but that's the idea. And they really promote that. So that's your responsibility, Joy, in case you know.
The country is such small, and the marriage between them should be considered an intermarriage.
Yeah.
Intermarriage?
Intermarriage, right, yeah.
The clothing affinities.
Yeah. There are many, it's a very interesting society. But, you will believe this and you will not be allowed to forget it. I think that's the thing that I think a lot of people find interesting about Singapore. But people are very proud of what they've accomplished. And this has led to some very interesting situations. One of them is a certain degree of press censorship. You cannot really criticize government officials. If you do, the way they deal with that issue is by suing you. So people get wrapped up in big legal suits because they apply British libel law. British libel law is really different from American libel law. If you're a public figure in the United States, you're free game for anybody. I mean, just look at our political campaign and all of this. If you had that sort of thing in Singapore, that would be considered disruptive and libelous. So you cannot say. And I remember once going at an international conference. This is not to diss Singapore, but this is sort of the mindset. The Wall Street Journal was banned from Singapore for a while, a number of years ago, because they'd said some kind of unkind things about Lee Kuan Yew and the fact that many of the big companies in Singapore have familial relations with Lee Kuan Yew, and things we can't say in Singapore, by the way. And so they banned the Wall Street Journal. I was at a conference in Hawaii, and we were all sort of international people, people from Singapore, China, Taiwan, US, from all over. And we were standing in line to go somewhere, and we happened to walk by a little kiosk that was selling the Wall Street Journal. And the guy in front of me was from Singapore. So they said, oh, so I sort of said, oh, look, here's the Wall Street Journal. You can get it here. Thinking, mistakenly, that as an academic, as a professor, one of our key values is freedom of information and freedom of speech. Wouldn't you agree? I hope we agree to that. Okay. Well, you know what his answer was? We won't let foreigners tell us how to run our country. Whoa. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I didn't want to upset you. So So it is a great place, but you got to mind your P's and Q's.
If you violate their rules, then you can be punished by them very severely.
That's.
They can humiliate you in front of you very severely.
Oh, I know. They definitely.
Yeah, I think you know their characters.
Yeah, well, I've been, but I like the place. Great food. Okay, yeah.
If you're not allowed to criticize the government, how is it keeping the government honest?
How does it keep the government honest? Good question. Okay. Well, the government is criticized, but gently. You don't go after people. In this country, we would say the United States, Barack Obama is leading the country to hell, or Barack Obama is leading the country to paradise, depending on your point of view, of course. Okay. You could have never said that Lee Kuan Yew is, or the officials of Lee Kuan Yew, like his son, who's the prime minister, okay, that he personally is not a good person. You couldn't say that.
He's not.
Okay, whap whap for you. 10 lashes, but 100. But the point is that you can criticize government policy, but you have to be careful. Okay, I was in Singapore once visiting with some friends and went to a party that was sort of a goodbye party for an American banker who was about to leave. And his story was that the week before, he had brought a suit against the Singapore tax authorities for a tax assessment which he felt was incorrect. He won his case. The next day, when he showed up at work, he found that his work visa had been canceled. Okay. Just leave it at that. Just leave it at that. I have a lot of respect for Singapore. My son's friend who works for, or used to work for one of those sovereign wealth funds, we were just joking about the relationships and how at the elite levels there's very close ties. He said, yes, it's true. There are a lot of of close ties. But you know, these people are really smart, which is true, that they're very competent. They're very, in the meritocratic society of Singapore, you don't get to the top without being good. I think we have to acknowledge that. It's very well run, but a tight little island, so to speak, and kind of fun to be there, and they've done a very good job of running the place. So let's be gentle about Singapore. There's a couple of other things about Singapore that are useful to know. It is probably the world's richest city, in part because it has very nice tax structures for those of us who have lots of money. I do not include myself in that. But it's not, for instance, accidental that one of the founders of Facebook, left the United States, and he was not an American citizen, but he left the United States and moved to Singapore. Why? Well, because life is good if you live in Singapore, if you got the money for it, and it's a very pleasant place for that. And of course, as an international hub, getting to the rest of the world is very easy, even though Singapore is kind of far away in some respects. So it's a good place for us to do business. There are a lot of American banks there. There are a lot of American energy companies there. And as long as you obey the rules, it's a very good place to be. Some of the, oops, let me get back to this video here tells us about why it's such a good place. They've developed parts of the city strictly for those who can afford it. Each lot comes with its own yacht mooring. It's quite an interesting place to go. But it is also sort of a society in evolution. It's not set in concrete. And the People's Action Party is having to make accommodation to the middle class and also to the people who are kind of left behind, because there are people in Singapore who are left behind. And this report here from the BBC tells us quite a bit about it. But the point I want to make for all of this is that the Chinese diaspora, to wrap up this section of the course, the Chinese diaspora, the overseas Chinese, are an incredibly dynamic part of the Asian economy and therefore an incredibly dynamic part of the world economy. It works by somewhat different rules than we might be used to. Relationships are crucial. Language becomes very important to operate in it. Okay. But it's very full of very, very, very smart people, and it's full of very, very ambitious people. And if you take the overseas Chinese or the Greater China, which would include the People's Republic, I think we probably see right now where the world economy may be heading, and something to pay attention to. So guys, learn Mandarin. If you really want to work harder, learn Cantonese. I think you will have very successful business careers. Other than that, just study German and you'll do great. Okay. Thank you all. We'll see you on Tuesday.